Folake Acheampong had not arrived late. She had not misread the meeting time, taken the wrong exit off the 401, or worn the wrong thing. She had not forgotten a single document or signed her name wrong on any page of the 63-page acquisition agreement that her legal team had spent 9 months reviewing. She had done nothing wrong of any kind. But when she walked through the revolving glass doors of Northvex Solutions on a gray Tuesday morning in early March, a man in a fitted gray suit stepped directly into her path before she had taken 6 steps across the lobby floor. "This is a private facility," he said. "You'll need to wait outside." Folake looked at him. She looked past him at the chrome Northvex logo mounted behind the reception desk. She looked at the young woman sitting behind that desk, who had gone very still, the way people go still when they understand they are witnessing something they will probably carry for a long time. "My name is Folake Acheampong," she said. Her voice was even, unhurried. "The acquisition closes today. I have a meeting in the 3rd-floor boardroom at 9 o'clock. The man did not move. His name was Gareth Morrow, head of building security, 17 years with Northvex. He had the posture of someone who had never once been genuinely told he was wrong. "We haven't received confirmation of your authorization," he said. Folake opened her briefcase. Matte black, structured, the kind that does not announce itself, and removed a sealed folder. Inside it was the signed and notarized acquisition agreement, filed with the Ontario Ministry of Economic Development 11 days earlier. She held it out to him. He took it from her hands without looking at the cover page. He carried it to the reception desk, set it down, and placed one hand flat across the top, as though it might try to leave on its own. Then he picked up the desk phone and made a call Folake was not supposed to hear clearly. She heard it clearly. 4 words: "She's here. Come down." The young woman at the desk, whose name was Tessa, 24 years old, 3 months into her first professional job, kept her eyes on her screen during the call. But she had heard those 4 words too, and the particular silence between them told her exactly as much as the words themselves had. 2 men arrived from the elevator within 90 seconds, which told Folake that they had been waiting for her, or for something, before she had ever stepped off the parkade elevator. The first was Dawson Holt, 56, the outgoing chief executive of Northvex Solutions, a man who had spent 30 years building something he had never fully understood was not entirely his to keep. He wore a charcoal suit and the expression of someone who has decided in advance that a problem does not need to be solved, only managed. The second man was younger, trimmer in the shoulders, carrying a tablet and the self-consciousness of someone recently promoted who was still deciding how much of himself to put into the role. His name was Alec, and he stood half a step behind Dawson in a way that communicated everything about the chain of authority in that lobby. Dawson looked at Folake, the way certain people look at a painting they are privately certain is not original. Ms. Acheampong," he said. "There seems to be some confusion about today's schedule." Folake's general counsel, a methodical woman named Orit, had called the night before, shortly before midnight, and told her something was off about the way Dawson had been conducting himself in the final days before close. He was asking questions, Orit said, that he should already have answers to. "Be careful what you carry in tomorrow," she had said, and left it at that. At the time, Folake had assumed it was the ordinary anxiety of a man preparing to hand over control of something he had built. She understood now, standing in this lobby with 3 men arranged around her, that it was not anxiety at all. "There is no confusion," Folake said. She removed a second document from her briefcase, a 1-page summary from the Ontario Superior Court confirming registration of the acquisition transfer. "The deal closed at midnight last night. This building, its contents, and all associated intellectual property now belong to Bridgepoint Systems." Dawson's gaze dropped to the document for a fraction of a second. Then it returned to Folake, expression unchanged. "We're going to need to verify a few things before we can proceed," he said. Gareth stepped forward. "For security purposes, we'll need to examine the contents of your bag." Folake looked at Gareth, then at Dawson. On what grounds, she said. Gareth explained that all individuals accessing the upper floors were required to pass through screening. Folake pointed out that she was not a visitor. Dawson said that until the formal transition meeting had concluded, she did not hold executive access to the premises. Folake noted, still calmly, that the transition had been completed at midnight by the terms of the agreement currently sitting under Gareth's hand, and that she was under no legal obligation to submit to a search of her personal property. Gareth took one step closer, not threatening, precisely, just removing the physical gap between her answer and her compliance, as though the two were equivalent. It's a formality, he said. It was not a formality. She could see from the way his eyes moved. Not to her briefcase as a whole, not to the sealed folder he was already holding, but specifically to the side pocket, zipped shut, that he knew exactly what he was looking for and where he expected to find it. Someone conducting a general security sweep looks at everything. A person with a target goes directly. She let him take the briefcase. She stood with her hands loose at her sides, and she watched. He found the encrypted drive in 40 seconds. It was smaller than a deck of cards, matte gray, no visible ports or manufacturer markings. He held it up between two fingers and looked at Dawson over Folake's shoulder. Something shifted behind Dawson's eyes. "We'll need to hold on to this," Gareth said, "pending verification of its contents." "That device belongs to me," Folake said. "It may contain proprietary Northvex data," he said. "It contains proprietary Bridgepoint data," she said, "collected during due diligence, which we are legally entitled to retain." Dawson stepped forward for the first time. He stopped closer than necessary, in the way men sometimes stand when they want to make a point without technically making a statement. "I'll be direct," he said, dropping his voice to the register. "People use when they are pretending to do you a favor. We've been receiving signals that some of our core IP may have been compromised during the review process. Until we can confirm nothing left this building without authorization, we have to treat every unverified device as potential evidence." Alec was typing something on his tablet. Tessa, at the desk, had stopped pretending to look at her screen. Folake studied Dawson for a long moment. "How did you know the drive was in the side pocket?" she said. Dawson said nothing. "Gareth didn't check the main compartment first," she said. "He went directly to the side pocket, which is not where most people keep documents, which means someone told him where to look. She let that sit in the air between them. Someone with specific knowledge of what I was carrying told your security director where to find a particular item inside my bag. That isn't a security protocol. That's a coordinated search." The lobby was quiet enough that the ventilation system was audible. "You're not under arrest," Dawson said, the words coming out slightly too quickly. "We're simply asking for your cooperation." Folake studied him the way she had once studied a failed security architecture model. Carefully, without feeling, looking for the point where the logic had broken down. "The device is biometric locked," she said. "Forcing it initiates a complete wipe in 6 seconds. And before you ask, I am not going to unlock it for you." Gareth turned the drive slightly under the lobby lights. He noticed for the first time a faint ring of sensors along its edge that had not been visible before. Something moved across his face. He put the drive in his jacket pocket anyway. There was a version of Folake Acheampong that none of the men standing in that lobby had bothered to imagine before she walked through the doors. She had grown up in a 2-bedroom apartment in Scarborough with her mother, her grandmother, and a younger brother who slept on a pull-out couch until he was 15. They had one computer for the 4 of them, a donated desktop that crashed every time the weather changed, and Folake had learned everything she could from it before graduating to the public library on Brimley Road, where she taught herself to code from textbooks held together with elastic bands. She had worked double shifts at a logistics warehouse for 4 years while finishing her computer science degree part-time. She had eaten a lot of instant noodles. She had slept less than she should have and complained about it to no one. By the time she was 30, she had spent 6 years as a lead security architect for two of the country's largest financial institutions. She had designed document integrity systems now used by 3 provincial departments. She had personally written the forensic audit protocol that her due diligence team had used throughout the Northvex review process. And she had spent 11 months finding, quietly and methodically, a pattern of financial irregularities buried inside Northvex's licensing revenue records. The drive Gareth Morrow had just placed in his jacket pocket contained the surviving copy of an audit trail showing that Dawson Holt had been licensing Northvex's core encryption algorithms to a competitor, Vantex Corporation, for 18 months, routing the payments through 2 shell companies registered in Alberta and Nova Scotia, and reporting none of it to the Northvex Board of Directors. If that documentation reached Folake's legal team before the closing meeting, as it was supposed to, the acquisition price would be subject to immediate renegotiation downward, and Dawson Holt would face securities fraud charges before the transfer agreement's ink was technically dry. He had needed that drive out of her hands. Someone had told him it would be in that briefcase. Someone had told him exactly where. What Dawson had not known, what none of the 3 men in that lobby had bothered to consider, was that the briefcase was a Bridgepoint product. Her own company manufactured them for government clients. The interior lining contained a passive recording system with its own independent power source. No dependency on any external signal, logging audio, GPS coordinates, and a forensic timestamp for every item removed from the bag without biometric authorization. From the moment Gareth Morrow's fingers touched the side pocket zipper, he had been generating evidence. Danielle Chartrand arrived at 11 minutes past 9. She was 38, a corporate and civil rights attorney who had handled 3 landmark cases in the past 5 years and who walked across the Northvex lobby the way people walk when they have read every relevant statute within the past 24 hours and are not interested in having them summarized. She took in the situation in seconds. Folake without her briefcase. Gareth near the desk with the sealed folder. Alec with his tablet. Dawson between all of them and the elevators. Ms. Acheampong, she said, don't say anything else. She turned to Dawson. I need a complete account of every action taken with my client's property since she entered this building. Dawson described it as an internal security matter. Danielle said the matter had ceased to be internal the moment a registered owner of this facility was denied access to it, and her personal property removed without consent or a warrant. Alex started to speak. Danielle looked at him once, and he stopped. She produced a small digital recorder from her coat pocket and stated the date, the time, the building address, and the names both Dawson's and Gareth's lanyards, slowly enough that the pronunciation could not be disputed later. Gareth started to object. Danielle reminded him that he had been recording this lobby continuously for years and that her recorder would simply ensure that whatever existed in the system's logs tonight still existed in the morning. Dawson's eyes moved to Gareth at the word existed, small, involuntary, a fraction of a second. Danielle noted it. She had spent 11 years learning to read exactly that kind of flinch, the kind that told her far more than any written statement would. Noel Adesanya was 50 years old and had been a senior investigator with the Ontario Securities Commission long enough to understand that a clean set of books was not the same thing as an honest set of books. He opened the Northvex complaint file 2 days after the lobby incident, expecting a standard due diligence dispute. He stopped expecting that within the first 40 minutes. He cross-referenced Northvex's licensing revenue figures from the past 3 annual filings against the actual invoices generated by their software division and found a gap. Not large enough to be caught in a routine audit, precisely sized to be intentional. He requested Dawson Holt's personal communication records for the preceding 18 months and found a thread of messages to a director at Vantex Corporation, a man named Kenneth Fair. that did not belong in any legitimate business negotiation. He found the Alberta Shell Company. He found the Nova Scotia account. He found an email in which Dawson had written, in plain and unhurried language, that the transaction needed to be finalized before the Acheampong transfer went through, and that Gareth had confirmed access to the briefcase. Noel read that line twice before reaching for his phone. He had also listened by then to the recording recovered from the briefcase lining. 38 minutes of continuous audio, GPS tamp-sainted, and biometrically authenticated, beginning at the moment Gareth's hand touched the side pocket zipper. He listened to the part where Gareth went directly to the side pocket, without checking anywhere else. He listened to the part where Folake asked how Gareth had known where to look, and to the silence that followed. In 22 years of this work, he had found that certain silences answered questions more precisely than any confession. Tessa's witness statement arrived separately. She described Gareth going directly to the side pocket, without hesitation. She described Alec deleting files from his tablet while standing in the lobby. She said she had watched all of it and had wanted to say something at the time. Had even opened her mouth once. But had closed it again because in 3 months of working in corporate environments, she had not yet seen evidence that saying something produced any result other than isolation. She said it now, she told investigators, because something had clearly changed. Gareth Morrow had his security license suspended the same week his communication records were submitted to the OSC. The messages between him and Dawson ran back 8 months, including one sent the evening before Falake's arrival that described the briefcase model in precise detail. Its dimensions, the placement of the side pocket, the style of the zipper pull, with a final notation, "She always carries it. That's where you'll find what we need." Alec had cooperated early. He handed over deleted files, access logs, and a written account of every instruction he had received. It did not undo what had been done, but it gave investigators the final connective tissue needed to close the case against Dawson Holt and trace the payment network to Kenneth Fair at Vantex. Danielle built the civil case the way she built all of them, methodically, closing every gap before defense counsel had a chance to locate it. She did not only argue that Folake had been a lawful owner denied access to her own property, though the recordings made that particular argument almost mechanical. She argued something harder to dismiss, that the search had been planned in advance, coordinated across multiple parties, and carried out under the assumption that a woman who arrived the way Folake had arrived could only be a problem requiring management rather than an executive requiring access. There was no building policy authorizing lobby searches of incoming executives. There was no precedent, not a single incident log, showing that any prior incoming owner or officer had been subjected to one. There was only Gareth going directly to the side pocket, and the silence when Folake asked how he had known. When Dawson faced Folake across a table at the formal regulatory proceeding, surrounded by attorneys, with OSC investigators present and a transcript being made, he had none of the composure he had carried into the lobby. He looked at her and attempted, one final time, to frame himself as a man who had been protecting a company he had built from the ground up. Folake looked past him at the wall. "You weren't protecting the company," she said quietly. "You were protecting a side arrangement that you had been running behind the company's back for a year and a half. You needed that drive out of my briefcase before your own board saw what was on it. That's why Gareth knew where to look. That's why you were in the lobby at all." Dawson had no answer for that. Everyone seated at that table understood what his silence confirmed. He lost his director credentials, his eligibility for any senior officer role in a federally regulated company, and a civil settlement that Danielle described on the phone to Folake as appropriate without further elaboration. Gareth lost his license. Alec was removed from the industry for 2 years. Kenneth Fair at Vantex came under parallel federal investigation within the week, and 3 additional entities connected to the Shell payment network were flagged for audit before the month was out. Folake did not move immediately into the third-floor executive suite. She spent the first 2 weeks in the building's lower floors, walking the departments, introducing herself without ceremony, asking questions in the flat and genuinely curious tone that lets employees understand they are being heard rather than assessed. She kept the sealed folder, the one Gareth had placed on the reception desk with his hand flat across it, the one he had never once looked at the cover page of, mounted in a frame on the wall of her new office. Beside it, under glass, was the encrypted drive that had spent approximately 40 minutes in the pocket of a security director's jacket. The drive was connected to nothing. It simply sat there, matte gray and unmarked. Visitors who asked about the display rarely needed the explanation more than once. She stopped by the front desk on a Thursday afternoon in late April to ask Tessa something about the building's visitor protocol. Tessa looked up and said carefully that she hoped Folake understood she had not been part of what happened in that lobby. Folake told her she knew that. "I didn't say anything while it was happening," Tessa said. "I wanted to. I almost did." "I know," Folake said. "What you said afterwards still mattered, probably more than you realize." She thought about that exchange for most of the drive home, not because it had surprised her, but because it had not. She had prepared the briefcase the way she had, because she understood, with the kind of clarity that accumulates slowly over years and setbacks, that preparation was the only form of protection she could fully rely on. She had learned that not bitterly but plainly, the way you learn things that are simply true. That doing everything correctly was not sufficient on its own. That the world as it actually operated was not the world as it was supposed to operate. And that the distance between those two things was a gap she had to build her own bridges across. She had built one into the lining of a briefcase. She had built another into 9 months of careful documentation. She had built another simply by showing up on a Tuesday morning without raising her voice, without flinching, without giving 3 men who expected a reaction the satisfaction of one. On the last Tuesday of April, exactly 8 weeks after the morning, she had walked in and been stopped before she made it 6 steps past the front doors. Folake Acheampong drove to the building that was now legally, and in every other sense, Bridgepoint North, parked in the underground structure, and rode the elevator to the lobby. The doors opened. She crossed the marble floor. There was no man stepping into her path, no hand placed on a folder, no forward call made to someone waiting upstairs, no eyes going directly to the side pocket of anything. There was only the lobby, the new Bridgepoint, lettering on the wall behind the desk, clean black type on brushed steel, and Tessa, who looked up and said good morning the way you say it to someone who has always belonged there. Folake said good morning back. She pressed the elevator button for 3. She thought briefly, as the doors closed, of the drive sitting in its glass case upstairs. She thought of the version of that Tuesday morning that might have unfolded differently. If she had carried any other briefcase, kept the drive in any other pocket, trusted that the building would let her in without a system already running to document what happened if it didn't. She thought of how many other mornings ended differently. In lobbies just like this one, for women who had arrived equally prepared and equally entitled to be there, and who had walked in without 38 minutes of authenticated audio and an attorney already dialed before the elevator doors opened. She did not arrive at any resolution about that. She rarely did. Some truths did not resolve so much as deepen. The elevator reached the 3rd floor. The doors opened. She stepped out into the corridor of her own building and walked, unhurried and unimpeded, toward her office at the end of the hall.